Now, everybody knows the old saying, you can't heal until you're hurt correctly. Well, here at Sinister Minutes, we take that pretty seriously. And because we care so much about you, our loyal listeners, we've racked our brains trying to come up with something we're sure all of you desperately need. Now, we're not trying to suggest anything about the kinds of people who listen to us, at least nothing beyond the fact that you are not okay. But this is something we're super excited about, and we think you will be too. Introducing our latest and greatest subscription service, Trauma Plus. In the past, you may have worked with therapists, psychiatrists, even exorcists. The list goes on, but they all take the same approach, reviewing events that cause trauma in your life and working to give you the tools you need to move past that. Well, that takes too damn long. So Sinister Minutes has developed a revolutionary approach. We don't care what caused your trauma, because we're going to hit you with fresher, louder trauma that will make that thing you've been struggling with your entire life feel like a cakewalk in comparison. As with all our subscription services, Sinister Minutes provides a variety of tiers to meet every budget and level of psychological distress. Unsure what you're even anxious about? Try the basic tier and dip your toe into suffering. Each month you'll be met with unease, dread, awkward silences, and recurring dreams where you miss an important exam. Or try our Plus service, where we add in carefully curated personal horrors, existential doubt, and invasive questions that linger for years. The premium tier offers full reality destabilization, constant awareness of your own mortality, and flashbacks to events that haven't even occurred yet. Feeling weighted down by old trauma? Get Trauma Plus, where we introduce new trauma so fresh your old pain won't stand a chance. The first 50 subscribers who mention this ad receive a bonus package, including a personalized moment that breaks you. After Trauma Plus, my childhood doesn't even register anymore.
I thought I was broken. Turns out I just wasn't broken enough.
Trauma Plus is not therapy. Trauma Plus does not replace licensed professionals, loved ones, or hope. Trauma Plus may cause dissociation, clarity, and screaming. Trauma Plus may lead to sudden loss of expendable income. Sinister Minutes features tales that include disturbing content. That's intentional because, like the podcast itself, the creators here at Sinister Minutes are really not okay. Now, having said that, realize that content featured on this podcast may include descriptions of some pretty horrific things at times. It is a dark fiction podcast, after all. So we hope that you are anticipating some degree of abuse and blood, of harm and death, of suicide, of sex, of injury, of mutilation, of pain, and certainly some profanity. Maybe a little bit of screaming, occasionally some threats, a bit of torture, a bit of victim blaming. And as always, at some point, we're sure that you're going to encounter some witches. Don't say we didn't warn you. Welcome to Sinister Minute Season 2, Episode 22, and Happy New Year! Alright, New Year's Eve was over a week ago, but your Sinister Minutes team is still nursing a hangover. At least we think it's a hangover. Hangovers are purple pulsing creatures with skin that seems to be turned inside out and tentacles emerging at odd spots throughout their bulbous bodies. Right? I mean, this thing just showed up here New Year's Day, and Tim and I certainly did not perform any ancient invoking rituals that we discovered in books covered in oddly textured leather, all while under the influence of whatever it was we took early that evening to liven things up. Anyway, we've been nursing it for the past week now, and it's making this delightful moaning, cooing sound. And, oh, enough of that. Today we're bringing you a delightfully horrific tale set in, of all places, the Wild West. Get ready for a showdown, a gunfight, and a loyal horse or two. But this sure is shootin' ain't bonanza. The Well was written by E.B. Summer, whose work has been featured in the Daily Tomorrow, Manawaker Flash Fiction Podcast, and the Stygian Zine. She is an associate member of SFWA and can be found at www.ebsummer.com. We'll post that link in the show notes. After that journey into the realm of dusty boots and gunsmoke, Tim's got something to share, a piece he calls Night Terrors. We are quickly closing in on the end of our second season and going strong. We're grateful to all of you for listening, for supporting us, for sharing Sinister Minutes with people you know and people you don't, for hitting like wherever you listen to us, for subscribing, for submitting your stories, for visiting us at sinisterminutes.com. Tim and I need to get back to our hangover because she... Yes, that's her preferred pronoun, and we are not going to argue with her about it because she's calling us to her now. It's a beautiful relationship we'll be nurturing forevermore, since she penetrated our skulls with the intention of driving us insane and eating our brains. Well, she tried to take on more than she could chew. Things are all better now for all of us here in the wonderful world of not okay. The Well, written by E.B. Summer, narrated by Kurt Homan. It was dawn. The sheriff watched from a wooden rocker on the porch of Mabel's saloon as Sal loaded her saddlebags with a few pieces of hardtack, a change of clothes, spare cylinders, and her black leather Bible. He pushed the old chair back and forth, feeling with his tongue for the little pocket in his cheek that held his chewing tobacco. Most townspeople were still in bed, recovering from the night before. "You heading to the well again, Sal? That's 3 times this week." Sal pulled hard at the straps of her horse's saddle. Her hat hung between her shoulder blades, the drawstring snug around her throat, not one to be deterred by silence alone. The sheriff grunted and spoke again. "Don't you think that'll stir things up that should be left to lie?" It was just the two of them on Main Street. The sheriff moved the mound of tobacco to the left side of his mouth with his tongue and rocked. "You ready to take over, Sheriff? I'll retire as soon as you say the word." Sal's voice was rough like gravel and matched her appearance. With her broad-brimmed hat and duster, she looked hard, like she'd become a half-desert creature herself. She mounted her mare and turned to look at him. Her eyes were a deep black coal, her skin weather-beaten and lined with wrinkles. He kept his lips pursed for a moment before adopting an air of indifference, smirking and tipping his hat to her. "You be sure to come back to us, Sal. It'd be a shame to lose you." She dug her heels into the side of her horse, and it quickly sped up to a trot. Her gaze turned to the road. When she was almost out of earshot, the sheriff called out once again, louder. "You know, most folks don't believe you're still fighting them. There's been no sign of one for months." He heard her giddy up the horse, and a little cloud of dust rode up behind them. He watched until the woman and her horse were just a small dot against the horizon. Sal looked out at the desert as she rode, letting Shadow keep to his own pace once the town had fallen away behind them. The sun rose quickly, turning the low bushes that dotted the landscape from gray to orange. The muscles in her legs still ached from the previous day's ride, and she felt molded to the saddle, stiffened to its precise shape. It would take a few hours to reach the well, and she hummed a little to keep Shadow and herself company. Little dust-colored lizards skittered across the sand, but few other creatures showed themselves. With the clear weather, she and the horse made good time, arriving at the well before midday. The well was so deep you couldn't see the bottom. It was hand-dug and bordered with crude cuts of sandstone all the way down, which helped filter water pulled from the deepest hidden places of the desert. On either side of the opening and across the top were wooden beams lashed together tightly with rope. And in the center another rope dropped down into the cavern, disappearing into black. When there was wind, it whistled through the circle of rocks that made up the perimeter of the well, throwing grains of sand against it and wearing the sharp edges smooth. There was no wind today. Sal's wide-shouldered duster and hat shielded her from the sun, but made her sweat. She felt the little droplets beading down her back and thought of the precious liquid leaving her body. She took a small sip of water from the cowhide pouch on her hip, tasting leather and dust, and pulled gently on the reins. Shadow slowed from a trot to an ambling walk as they drew near. From the ground sprouted gray-green desert lavender bushes and joint fir. She swung her right leg over Shadow's backside, dismounting in one quick, fluid motion. The sky above was clear and cloudless, and the sun shone down on the cracked and sandy soil. It was so bright that Sal had to squint. When she closed her eyes, the imprint of light lingered on the backs of her eyelids. She patted her horse's neck and stepped to the edge of the well, inspecting the area around it for signs of disturbance. She sniffed at the air, and it smelled of minerals deep underground, a faint, metallic scent. Sal felt her nerves twitch. "Milak, Milak." The sound came from somewhere nearby. Through muscle memory alone, Sal's left hand drifted to the revolver at her hip. There were many things that could climb up from the depths of the hole that had been dug 3 decades ago, and only a few of them could be stopped by the gun she carried. She listened with her whole body. A flicker of darkness appeared in the corner of her eye, but she did not turn toward it. Trying to catch the anomalies was an art all on its own. The trick was to hold them in the corner of your vision, just long enough to determine their approximate location. She must be the first to strike, and swiftly. She had only 6 rounds. If she hesitated even a millisecond, a creature could latch onto her and pull her down into the depths of the well, to the hell they grew in. Shadow took a step back and reared his head, showing the whites of his eyes and letting out a little squeal. She watched him carefully. The horse was able to look straight on at things she didn't dare face herself. The sound repeated, "Milak, Milak." She waited a beat, still watching Shadow. The horse let out a louder squeal, and she drew. The next moments were automatic, like breathing. There was the heavy weight of metal in her hand, the sharp kick of the trigger, the smell of gunpowder. Then the dull thud of a creature hitting the ground that meant it was over. It was a bloated, terrifying thing. She lifted one corner of it with her boot to inspect it and nearly gagged at the stench that hung around it like a cloud. She counted 9 appendages protruding from a thick, centralized body. It had no eyes, but there was an opening on the side that was lined with what looked to be teeth. Its skin was thick but moist. The still writhing purple-black tentacles were in stark contrast to the muted tans and grays of the surrounding desert. The sky was one dark cloud on their way back. It had been a long journey, with Shadow bearing the weight of both Sal and the creature she'd shot. The horse's neck was slick with a viscous slime that oozed from the skin of the corpse, and the long, thick tentacles hung down on either side. The front of Sal's duster, her vest, and her linen shirt were all drenched. Exhaustion settled over her, and her eyes flitted between closed and open. She let Shadow's gentle rocking lull her. A jagged line of lightning appeared on the horizon, and the sharp clap of thunder that followed startled her awake. Shadow had stopped abruptly. Sal clucked and weakly dug the spurs of her boots into the horse's side, but he didn't budge. The few buildings that made up the town were visible but distant, and a low cackle of electricity hung in the air. She heaved at the corpse and rolled it off Shadow, kicking up a little cloud of dust as it fell. She dismounted stiffly and rolled her neck, her muscles cramped and aching. She reached for a tentacle with one hand and grabbed Shadow's rein with the other. After a few increasingly desperate tugs on the leather reins, Shadow grudgingly stepped forward. Sal winced as she awkwardly dragged the thing along the ground towards the town while leading Shadow. She switched arms every so often and took frequent rests. The corpse was heavier than she remembered. She labored with it for what seemed to be an hour or more, looking back at the strange tracks they were leaving behind them. Her muddled boot prints, 3 long lines in the dirt from the creature, and the horse's tracks. Another clap of thunder sounded around them, but no rain fell. She left the corpse a fair distance from the edge of the building and continued into the town center, tying Shadow to the hitching post in front of the general store. Every building but the saloon was dark, and the strings of a fiddle could be heard along with Mabel's distinct twang. Little clumps of dry grasses grew on the road, and she gathered and brought them over to the corpse of the creature, tucking them beneath the appendages. She took out a matchbook from the pocket in her vest. Most of the matches inside were ruined from moisture. A spark took on the 3rd attempt, and she brought it down to the sprigs of grass. It wasn't until the flames were up to her chest and a horrible-smelling black smoke was spreading up and over the buildings of their town that the people began to emerge from the saloon. First was the owner of the general store, William, and then came Mabel, the barkeep, and the sheriff. The fiddle stopped playing mid-melody, and the porch of the saloon groaned under the weight of people who didn't dare come closer to the impromptu bonfire. Fires were to be feared, as much or more so than the anomalies. The townspeople migrated to the center of town and stared at the sizzling mass of flesh, wearing expressions ranging from curiosity to outright disgust. Only the sheriff wore a smile, and Sal found something sinister lurking behind his mocking gaze. "More coming," Sal said. She had to speak loudly to be heard over the howling wind and rumbling sky. "I've killed one every time I've gone to the well, but there will be more." Sheriff was still staring at her with his strange grin, and she noticed a flicker of a shadow next to his left ear. He had stepped down from the porch of the saloon and stood slightly in front of the crowd. She shut her eyes tight and reopened them, feeling dazed. Was it possible the creatures were here too? Had she failed in her duty? The townspeople seemed like themselves, shifting and muttering in the face of the horror she had brought to their doorstep. But the sheriff, there was something strange about him, something she should have noticed at dawn. She saw now that he was both himself and something darker, something that came from the strange other place at the bottom of the well. He looked like the same man, but she could tell through instinct that he was more like the creature currently engulfed in flames than the rest of them. The sheriff took a step toward her. Mabel tore her eyes away from the fire to look between him and Sal. The thick stench from the smoke was something Sal could taste in the back of her throat. It was the acrid sting of something rotten. Her hand drifted to the revolver at her hip.
Easy now, Sal,
Mabel said, her voice wavering.
I'm sure we can resolve this without violence, right, Sheriff?
He was still wearing his strange grin when he bent to spit onto the road, dispelling a long string of brownish-black liquid. The shadow alongside him grew as he straightened back up again. It covered his face like a veil, smudging his features. When she went to draw her gun, he was faster, letting out a shrill screech as the shadows around him kept expanding to engulf them both. The sounds of the storm were overtaken by a wet, sucking noise. Suck, suck, suck. In the space between Sal's eyes, a blinding pain grew. She reached for her gun, but found her fingers to be clumsy and slow. When she finally felt the familiar weight of it in her palm, the shadows had thickened and closed around her, clouding her vision. She considered firing, but hesitated. What would stop her from killing Mabel, or one of the other townspeople? She holstered her gun and dropped to her knees, feeling instead for the dagger she kept in her boot. Time turned elastic, and she felt the darkness dancing around her. For the first time in years, she felt cold. Then, without notice or reason, the shadows cleared. With her dagger in hand, she struck as soon as she saw the startled face of the sheriff. The blade sliced cleanly across his throat, and blood gathered at the wound. He fell to his knees first, then landed on his side. In death, he looked more like himself. His mouth hung open, and she saw the large, pale, pink tongue and each tobacco-stained tooth. His eyes, dull and glossy, looked up at the clouds above them. Her hand shook as she wiped the blade of her dagger against her filthy coat before returning it to its sheath. She may have had her quarrels with the sheriff, but she was sorry he was dead. There was a moment of awed silence before Sal felt the back of her neck prickle. She knew, somehow, that the dark presence that had taken over the sheriff had passed on to her. It was knowledge gained in the span of a few seconds. The sound was what she noticed first. Sound was like a pulse beneath her skin. Zuck, zuck. Zuck! When she closed her eyes, she saw the bottom of the well. It glinted in the darkness, the familiar ring of stones forming the border. Beneath the water, she saw creatures swimming in the black. Creatures that were shapes and colors she'd never seen before, sputtering in and out of existence. She watched them, entranced. The zuck, zuck, zuck was a constant, comforting beat. And the creatures were beautiful, in their way, graceful. A part of her longed to submerge herself in that cold pool full of creatures, but another part resisted. She was Sal, protector of this town, and she would not give in. As her eyes fluttered open, the well disappeared, and she saw the townspeople and collection of buildings. The storm had moved on, but it was dark. She looked into the eyes of the people she had sworn to protect, feeling the darkness within her, nearly tasting that cold, black water at the bottom of the well. Her eyes focused on the body of the sheriff still at her feet, and she steeled herself. She knew she would always long to return to the well. From now on, she must fight both the creatures that came from the depths and herself. Night Terrors, composed and performed by Tim Parker. Sinister Minutes is presented by Kurt Homan and Tim Parker. The musical score was composed and performed by Tim Parker. Our production team consists of Kurt Homan and Tim Parker. On behalf of everyone here at the Sinister Minutes podcast, namely Kurt Homan and Tim Parker, we thank you for listening, for joining us as we explore all the ways in which we are not okay. This audio program is copyright by Kurt Homan and Tim Parker under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.